Hey, how you doing? This Friday night's video, we're going to talk about flow editing and flow processing. This is one of the processes in your editing that you should do right after recording. After you've taken care of your recording is done well. This can all be dependent on how good of a performer you're working with, how good of a job you did on recording it, and how well they performed it. And we're in time. That's obvious. But this is a huge aspect that some people will get confused with compression, trying to compress a dynamic range before they've ever even done flow editing, which can cause can cause clipping and all kinds of problems that you're trying to scrunch things up that you just haven't done flow editing with, trying to do with compressor or maximizers, and which compressors and maximizers can take part in that, but that's normally in the first phase processing. And so I just wanted to address this as a topic unto itself. I call this flow editing and flow processing. This normally deals with a couple different things. This normally deals with cutting a lot, in manually doing these things, and it has to do with trying to deal with things on time. It has to do with compressing and stretching audio, and it has to do with the dynamics. This can be a good example to use for this is vocals, because the vocalist may become close to the microphone or get away from the microphone, or he's too soft or too loud, or he's not quite in time and he kind of lost the time for a little bit. And so there's a couple things you might want to do in there. Sometimes you want to clip the audio on either side, and you may want to slip it, slipping audio back and forth a little bit to try to get it in time, or just manually cut on either side and drag the audio back and forth a little bit. And also sometimes you might be wanting to compress the audio. Sometimes some part of it right in here, it needs to be compressed a little bit. So you can see how I'm compressing it. It needs to be compressed a little bit right in there because it didn't catch right in time like it should. Or I need to stretch it a little bit to stretch it out. And you got to be careful that you don't create audio anomalies by stretching or compressing too much. But it's a huge aspect that can make or break a production, because being in perfect time and the flow of words from one to the other, that they're in time as well as possible with everything going on around them, is a huge thing that can really make or break the production. Just a little bit out of whack can catch the listener's ear, and they might not even be conscious of it, but it affects their whole perception of how well the production is done. And sometimes you're just a little bit out of time. Some things are just a little bit out of time, and that's just part of the production. And you got to be careful you don't screw that up. That's like dynamics. That, one part of the song I'm really in the microphone, I want you to say it loud, and the other part I'm kind of quiet. That's a really simple, example of when dynamics are supposed to happen, and you don't want to fuss with that. You don't want to have this guy right here. He was singing nice and quiet here at the beginning, and then he started belting it out, and you go and try to push this up to the same loudness as that. Then you're ruining some of the dynamics that you don't want to. But you might not want that much dynamics. You might go, well, this word right here, part of these flow dynamics is also these dynamics between words. So you might have this word going into this word here that it's a little bit quieter. And you come to this part here, and let's say this part for that section right there, that this is a little bit louder. I mean, and you've got it to where you've recorded it well, so it's not clipping, but it's not too soft, so you make sure you capture the entire dynamic range of the vocal and the sound. But this other part is quiet, it's a little bit too quiet, or it's a little bit too loud. So this flow editing is very important once you've taken care of the timing issues of slipping and maybe compressing and stressing the audio, that going in here and going, okay, well, that just needs to be a little bit louder. This is before even dealing with something like this. I know right here that this is some S going on. I mean, I know it is, so I know that I want to de-S that a little bit. I'm going to do that in a few ways. The easiest way is just to bring the dang volume around it and then bounce the piece of audio together, right? It's a little more time consuming than some of the plugins that they've been coming out with to try to deal with it, by just pushing a button. But you really have a lot more control like this. You know exactly how much you're putting it down. And over here, you might have an S over here that you don't want pushed down as much, but you'd have to cut it as a separate piece of audio to process it with different settings on it. Where this way you can do it and know that I want a little bit louder here, a little bit softer here, whatever. T's and clicks and pops, tuz and does and things like that can be the same way. But anyway, that concept, without addressing those issues that are part of the editing, that you also got this problem is how loud do you want that to be? This is supposed to be soft, and you start to come to understanding that how's that best sound? The guy in his performance might have done a really good performance of it, but he might not have been exactly where he wanted to be from the microphone. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? So you adjusting it and going, well, no, that should be just a little bit louder before it hits this. And then when it hits this word right here, that he's got this other word here, that this is going to be a little bit louder than that, but not as loud as this. Does that make sense? Or it's a little bit louder. It's like some kind of thing where it's like, no, it sounds much better if I crank that up a little bit and it hits that flow to where it's like, da-na-na, ba-da-na-na. You know, does that make sense? What was that phrase right there? Does that make sense? And that sounds really cool, and it sounds really cool. You got to be really careful that in these flow editing processes that you don't really screw with the natural thing. Sometimes you really screw with the natural thing to get some kind of effect that's just wild or weird or some dang thing that just sounds cool in production. But that's a different type of reason of flow editing. This is really just trying to get that production to sound as well as it can. So these are huge concepts. And this is in vocal. I'm going from one word to the next, all the way across this word here, this word here, this out to here, that these might be just a little bit louder there. This might be perfect there, and this right here before it goes that, I want that a little bit louder because it's kind of climbing up, and it's got a little bit of better effect the flow editing of it is if it kind of boosts up there before it comes to this other spot here where I have started editing it. I'm not sure how I want that flowing. But you can see that just in this spot right here that I've done a whole bunch of flow editing. First of all, I've checked the timing, done some slipping around it, or moved the waveform itself to try to get it in time, compressing or stretching in different areas to try to figure out that this over here, I need to stretch that out to right there. I mean, I know I'm being nitpicky as hell, but I want that right there on that 11.2. That's right where that's supposed to be. And this over here is a little bit off, and I need to compress that, or I need to stretch that out because that's hitting right about right here, and that's right about where it should be hitting, being a good time. And I've actually, besides slipping the audio to get it to where this right here, the beginning of it, is hitting about where it's supposed to be right on this point here. Not only that, but I've done some stretching and compressing to really get that flow going. And then afterwards, I've really gone into it and started messing with the dynamics so that between each word and each phrase, there's sometimes between a word, a phrase, or sometimes dynamics. You can have spots where it gets really difficult where this is raising here. So you've got, you know, how do I fix that to where I raise it? Well, that can be very hard. Sometimes you have to raise it up and then compress it a little bit to where it's compressing and, you know, compressing the audio, or using expanders and, you know, upwards expansion to try to expand this up in here that's up above a certain level and below a certain other level. But that can be really complicated flow editing. We won't get that deep, because if you get that deep, more than likely somebody's really screwed up in their performance, and you're better off trying to get a recapture of the performance, unless it's something that just can't be redone. That they're giving you the file and they're like, Bob is not spending $10,000 to come back in the studio to re-record that one song, that one thing, dude. It's not happening. You better find some way to fix it, right? Well, that's your job, to work magic in the studio. So anyway, we're really looking at this flow editing. And that's basically the concept that we're looking at. We're dealing with those issues because it may not seem like that big a deal that this word right here is about there, then it goes quiet here just a little bit less. You look how much less that is. It's not much, but it means a lot, and it really makes the production. Then it rises up here, and then because of this right here happening here, and the volume differences that are happening, you know, between all these different dynamic things that are happening of the flow of the words, the phrases, and as it goes to the production, and then as it goes to a different section. Like this is a different section completely right here. This section between here and here is a totally different section. And you see some of the dynamic differences there. And if I blow this up, you can see that there are dynamic differences. Just because this spike's way up here doesn't mean that this whole area here doesn't need to get pushed up some because it's too quiet. The flow doesn't sound right. It sounds like he stepped away from the microphone or he got a little too quiet. He was running short of breath, and before he took his next breath, or before he was, does that make sense? There can be all kinds of issues. Or this little area right here that you really need to go in there, come down to zero crossing, find zero crossing and cut that in there, and this needed to get pushed up just a little bit, you know, to really connect these other two words or phrases that needed to come up a little bit. And this need to make, you know, does that make sense? Where this was loud right in here, that needed to push up a little bit, that needed to come down a little bit or come up some, and this word right here was fine as far as you can see that it's, you know, pretty much in line here, and it sounds good. You can visualize it, you can hear it, and the flow is moving along through the production and through the vocal well. If you get some really good vocalists, like somebody like Freddie Mercury, some of the vocals he did, he might not have been recording through some of the best equipment, but some of them had really good control, that were really good performers and well trained, that have awesome control, that it just makes you cringe thinking that you even are going to screw with anything he did, because he might have wanted it done that way and you have a ball and baby fit because you started screwing with the flow of his dynamics, or his flow that he wanted something in time or out of time a little bit because the feeling he was trying to project. So you really have to take that in consideration also, who you're dealing with and how good of a performer they are, and really ask them about it. It may sound stupid that you'll be like, well, I want to talk to the performer because it's, you know, I want him in the studio when I'm doing this flow editing to see if he really sees it that way, because he's a damn good performer. He is, you know, a virtuoso vocalist, and I don't want to be screwing up his shit because the way I think it's supposed to be, when he's, you know, making millions of dollars on the way he does it. So you got to be really careful who you're dealing with also. And if you're not dealing with somebody that's top notch of a performer, that it's a good idea to go in there and start dealing with it and start working it and getting it done to where you can hear it. It sounds good. Start trusting your ears, start trusting your intuition about how it should flow to be done well. Like you've just taken you know, somewhere middle of the road performer and made his stuff sound like he is a top-notch performer and a virtuoso. That's part of your job and what part of flow editing is for. So with that in mind, we've kind of addressed that issue. That issue can get complicated, but once you start addressing that issue like we've talked about, you start experimenting with it, taking some vocals or doing some vocals yourself, and start experimenting with what that means and how you have to go about doing it, watching out for things like zero crossing. You know, you go cut a piece of audio, that if you cut the piece of audio and you're not familiar with zero crossing, there's a piece of zero crossing. Right there, that's zero crossing. It's hit zero, and you can cut there without probably causing a piece of an anomaly when you go ahead and you try to bounce that back together, that, you know, after you've adjusted it and command bounce, that you didn't cause some other anomaly that goes click, pop, but whatever, you know, because you didn't understand zero crossing. It causes you to start digging around also, and I suggest you really experiment with it to really understand it. And I also that can be with drums also. Here is a drum track, just the kick drum, and on this one somebody already compressed it, so, but you can see this one's a little quieter, this one's a little quieter, this one's a little bit louder, and you can see they fluctuate some. Now some of that's okay, there's just a little bit of difference. It gives it that live feel, like it's not robotic, but sometimes it's too much. Sometimes you get this one right here and you got this bass drum, but this one right here is fine, but this is just too much, bro. It's just too much quieter between this one and that one, and might want it to sound a little more natural, and I might not want it to be exactly the exact same level. It might be off, you know, a quarter dB or half a dB, something small, but you can hear that's not totally unnatural, and you quantized it to be like a robot, but you know, it's just a little bit too much. So you doing the flow editing, even simple on the dynamics like that, and doing this flow dynamics on that drum also, it might just have been a little bit off. Sometimes off just a little teeny bit is okay, it's got that live sound. Sometimes it's a little too much and it's just not right and it doesn't sound good. So that's part of flow editing. And I took a bass track here and I cut it up to show along here it's been compressed, this file, so it's not too bad. I'd probably do some flow editing on it anyway, but here it is uncompressed. The bass player playing here, he started hitting loud here, he hit soft here, he's hitting way loud here, and then he's hitting soft here and way loud here as he's playing along. And you're trying to figure out, is that good for the dynamics of the song, or do I need to go in here and start adjusting that all over the place so that the flow between each one of these notes and phrases flows together real well. Peace, hope, love. Have fun with your flow editing. I'll see you in the next video.